listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my disinvited co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have another great show for you today. We're going to start off with a dive into modern-day propaganda by both political parties in comparison to the reality of our grim situation here in the United States. Media and our political class over the years have fought hard to protect this mirage of American exceptionalism. Even now, as tens of thousands of people die and go hungry due to incompetence of the Trump administration and a bias towards the upper class by both political parties. Immediately after that, we'll be discussing the further implosion of the Russiagate narrative with the shocking realization, that's not shocking at all, that the Obama White House was instrumental in creating and fostering the narrative that Trump was working with the Russians. That is a weird and intricate story that you're not going to want to miss. Later in the hour, we'll get into the bombshell story that mainstream media is working hard to ignore. Silvercore, hit contract, elected president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. All of those things together. That's an odd way of saying a sentence, but basically, a hit was made on Nicolas Maduro, and the contract for Silver Corp has several people's name on it. You don't want to miss that. That is very weird and disturbing. There's several disturbing components to this, actually. I think the most, at least to me, is a private corporation is allowed to hire goons to invade a sovereign country to capture or kill its elected leader. And anyone, for that matter, getting in the way of accomplishing that objectives, be it civilian, police, or military personnel. It's an astonishing and really disturbing story. In the second hour, we'll have what will be a fascinating interview with Green Party presidential, or the candidate running for the Green Party presidential nomination, Howie Hawkins. Now, this will be a wide-ranging interview on Green Party priorities, how third parties can do more to just pressure our political system, and Hawkins' rationale for why the political device has become so detached from the wants and the needs of the population that it is philosophically bound to represent. Last but not least, it's Monday. That means Miss the Press. This is the segment where we get to lampoon the Sunday morning talking heads and the narratives that they propose, not to mention the things that they avoid. This is always a fun segment, so stay tuned for that one. But let's start here. Trump is following Britain and France's lead and throwing open the doors of the U.S. economy. Yes, we are still the epicenter of the coronavirus, with 1,370,999 cases of the infection, with more than 80,000 human beings being dead. And we are throwing open the economy. Now, it is true that while Trump is trying to convince the American public that it's safe to go to work, his own administration is beset by the virus or people being infected by the virus. You have people who are around Trump and who are around Pence that have been diagnosed. Also, the population is not on board for this, with 70% of the population concerned or preferring to keep it closed, concerned about their own health, meaning they do not want to die or get ill for something that is basically a virus, a real thing. And no. So how do you deal with this? You have a vast disparity between what the administration is talking about versus what the public is talking about. The public said keep it closed. The administration says we need to open it up. Again, the administration is functioning in the interest of the 1%, and they're functioning with this notion of political priorities of trying to get reelected. And they know that the Democratic Party is going to use the economy for fodder, and he wants to open that economy. This was the thing that Trump was betting on. Trump also knows that a large share, an outsized portion of the people who are affected by this are not his base. They're within the Democratic Party, meaning people of color who are going to be vastly, disproportionately affected by this virus. So Trump's response is to open it up. Now, in order to make this work, he has to somehow explain to the American public and sell to the American public that it's not really his fault that 80,000 human beings have died and that the estimates that these guys are making is going to double and the number of death toll and the people infected. He needs to somehow get that across that it is not his fault. What do? Blame China. We're going to get into scapegoating. Now, that scapegoating is done by both parties, but the scapegoating is done in slightly different ways because of the different power variations of the parties. Meaning the Trump administration and the Republican parties are in power, so they have one way of having to deal with the situation, whereas the Democratic Party, who is not in power, even though they do own the House, have a different way of dealing with this. All of it is just propaganda. Let's hear the first clip. Republicans are blaming China. They're trying to exude or get rid of their own blame, incompetence, and malfeasance, and all of these people dying and all of these people being infected for something that we knew for 3 months was going to hit us. We saw China closing down their cities. We saw, and by the way, for all of this talk about the World Health Organization, the United States pays a large part of that, had people in the World Health Organization that was feeding us the accurate numbers. Why do you think those senators sold their stocks? It was because they knew what was coming. The briefings, the intelligence briefings that the United States got goes all the way back to January. It is Trump's own incompetence and malfeasance that this gotten to be as bad as it is in the United States. But let's hear Pompeo blaming China. Let's hear the clip.
Don't know if the virus came from inside the lab in Wuhan. And then on Sunday, you said there's enormous evidence the virus came from inside the lab.
Those are both true.
So did the intelligence change over the weekend?
Those statements are both true. They're entirely consistent. They're entirely consistent.
So
Why
then,
are you highlighting one? And
wait,
not the other?
let's
I've now answered this question. I think it's the 13th time. Happy to try to answer it again. I'm not sure what it is that about the grammar that you can't get. We don't have certainty, and there is significant evidence that this came from the laboratory. Those statements can both be true. I've made them both. Administration officials have made them. They're all true. But focus on the most important piece here. The most important piece here is that the American people remain at risk.
Notice what he did.
The American people remain at risk because we do not know.
Notice what Pompeo did. Now, what Pompeo is referring to is an interview where he basically said this came from a lab in Wuhan. There's enormous evidence it came from a lab in Wuhan. Donald Trump, same thing, their own message. Now, in saying that, the reporter said, well, wait a minute, your own people in your administration said that this did not, that the preponderance of the evidence showed that this actually was natural transmission. He says, yes, okay, yeah, that's right. Basically, in that one interview, he said two things at once, which is what the reporter was getting at. But notice, at the end of that, the issue here, I understand all of this other stuff, but the issue here is that China and America is still at risk. How is America still at risk for something that started months ago that we knew was going to take place 3 months in advance? This is just basically blaming China for its own incompetence and malfeasance because they need to explain why are all these people dying and why are all these people infected. Here's the catch. Two things are happening at once. The American public believes Pompeo. They believe that China is responsible by the tune of nearly 2/3, meaning the propaganda in this case is working. However, they don't believe the administration, meaning two things are happening at once. They say, yes, China is responsible, but so are you. And Donald Trump's approval rating has been taking a hit, especially by older Americans, as they're the ones who are taking the brunt of this, not to mention people of color. Both things are happening at once. The propaganda is working. By the same token, the propaganda is not, because those people are actually dealing with the real material effects of what Pompeo and the Trump administration is doing. But what is the Democratic response? So Democrats of old used to be pretty robust in the way that they would go after issues of income inequality, issues of poverty, and for something like this, they would have used this as a reason for a moonshot. And issues of Medicare for all and everything else would have been on the table as mainstream, or at the very least, for, let's say, a strong component of the Democratic Party. That's what they used to be. Let's hear an example of Ted Kennedy fighting just for $2 increased minimum wage. This was, I think, in the 80s. Let's hear the clip.
We've had health savings amendments that'll benefit average for income of $112,000, $8 billion. We've had those kinds of amendments. And we're looking at the Kyle Amendment at $3 billion. But we still cannot get a $2.15 over 2 years. Over 2 years. What is the price? We ask the other side, what is the price that you want from these working men and women? What cost? How much more do we have to give to the private sector and the business? How many $1 billion more are you asking? Are you requiring? When does the greed stop? We ask the other side.
I love that clip. When does the greed stop? I love that. I love that. He's fighting and arguing for a $2 increase in the minimum wage. That's how hard they were fighting just for the $2 increase in minimum wage. And now you're in the middle of a pandemic where Ted Kennedy, would have tried to hit this to the moon. Now, the new Kennedy, who's in this, Joe Kennedy, yuckmouth Joe Kennedy, is talking about on Twitter, making the point of saying, hey, we need to make sure that we can cut healthcare costs. We need to cut healthcare costs in the midst of the coronavirus. We need people to have lawyers to fight with these people for their healthcare costs. Understand what that means, by the way. Instead of him pushing for Medicare for all, this is the nonsense. This is the best that you can get from the Democratic Party. Let's hear Pelosi, who is head of the House, who has pushed through every Republican plan that has come out, wring her hands about kids not being able to eat. Let's hear the clip.
There are other things where we're having some discussions, and one of them is food stamps. People are hungry in America. Brookings Institution had a report yesterday that moms were reporting that 1 in 5 children in America does not have enough food to eat. We see what's happening at food banks and the rest across the country, and it's really hard to explain to anyone why the Republicans would not support that.
Think about the difference between those two segments. You have the situation where Kennedy, fighting hard, Pelosi, head of the Democratic Party, head of the House, and she's wringing her hands about kids not being able to eat, despite the fact that she's put through every Republican plan that has come through. I'm making a very basic point, and I hate to keep being a broken record on this, but honestly, it requires repetitiveness in order to get across to break through the propaganda. Every time you put in a Democrat for not an affirmative argument about who they are, but entirely for who they're not, you get ineffective people, and that gets worse and worse and worse. Year after year after year, as one standard after another is broken in order to keep the monsters at bay. Bob, you talk about this all the time. What do you have to say about this? I mean, basically, you have Democrats just getting worse and worse and worse because people have lost any notion of accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you sound, when you say the Democrats would have done this back in the old days, you sound like the Republicans who always harbor on Abraham Lincoln being a Republican, right? They won the Civil War. They were against slavery. I mean, the Democrats, it's hard to go back to the 1980s and somehow say that is representative of the party and whether or not Ted Kennedy is a showman there talking about great inequalities while his family was quite wealthy, is always rich.
But he was serious
that's
about
what you're
that.
Going to go back and use.
I mean, let's be fair.
No, I mean, you can be serious about it. I think people can be serious and say all sorts of things. Do I think Democrats are serious about wanting to address economic inequality? Yeah, probably when they say it. Are they serious then when they formulate policies and actually go to do it? No. And I think that's where humans can be contradictory. And so you can have a Ted Kennedy who's extremely wealthy talking about economic inequality while his family is extremely wealthy still. I think people do need to really realize, and I think they're going to realize, is Donald Trump, for me at least, is going to have a strong political season here moving forward, despite how bad the coronavirus outbreak is going. When you don't have a formulated, consistent, organized opposition to Donald Trump, the Republican Party is going to run ramshot over you and basically be able to pick you apart and tear you apart because you're offering nothing in return. Jamal, we do need to take our first break of the hour before we head into a very busy and packed show. We got a lot here for you, Political Misfits. In the first hour, we'll be talking about the latest revelations on Russiagate, including the role Barack Obama and Susan Rice may have played in its early days. And we bring you more from the U.S.'s failed attempt at capturing Nicolas Maduro with 8 mercenaries. A ridiculous story, to say the least. And if that is not enough, don't you worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that, where we'll be joined by Howie Hawkins, the co-founder of the Green Party of America. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Hi, this is Max Kaiser. I'm here with Stacey Herbert, and we're doubling down.
Yeah, we're doubling down on crazy.
We're doubling down on our new show called Double Down on Sputnik. It's doubling down on absolute joyous radio nirvana. You will love it. You will want to listen to every single episode on Sputnik. Bye, y'all.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune in to Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schleiber here, kind of sort of still with Jamarl Thomas. We're excited to bring you a full week of brand new shows, episodes here on Radio Sputnik. Today is Monday. We'll be here through Friday every day from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're talking now about the latest from the story that won't die, but maybe is finally to its last gasp. I said that one too many times for me to actually say that again with seriousness, but that's Russiagate. Here to talk more about this and much more is Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News and author of How I Lost by Hillary Clinton. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Joe, it's a pleasure to have you here talking about a story, as I mentioned there, I thought was dead a few times, but seemingly it's still here in the news. Year 4, here we go. In a rush and flurry, the last weeks have been bombshell after bombshell when it's come to the fallout of the investigation into possible relations between Donald Trump's 2016 campaign and Russia. First, we had the report on the FISA courts and the bulk lies that were used to obtain warrants to spy on U.S. citizens. Then we found out even more problems with the Steele dossier. And last week, we saw there was nothing of substance in Twitter messages between Donald Trump's ally Roger Stone and Julian Assange. And now this week, we have even more when it comes to what Barack Obama knew about the investigation before he left office, and we get released House documents showing that the FBI and data security company CrowdStrike did not actually have evidence that Russia or anyone for that matter actually took the emails from the DNC. Joe, let's start with the last one there. The House Intelligence Committee released documents late last week that showed the committee was told 2.5 years ago that the FBI had no concrete evidence that Russia hacked DNC computers to steal the DNC emails published by WikiLeaks in July 2016. The until now buried closed-door testimony came on December 5th, 2017, from Sean Henry, a protege of former FBI Director Robert Mueller, for whom Henry served as the head of the Bureau's Cyber Crime Investigation Unit. Henry retired in 2012 and took a senior position at CrowdStrike, which you'll remember is the cybersecurity firm hired by the DNC and the Clinton campaign to investigate the cyber intrusions that occurred before the 2016 presidential election. Let me read part of the transcript here. Ranking member Adam Schiff asked in the interview of Mr. Henry, do you know the data in which the Russians exfiltrated the data from the DNC? When would that have been? Mr. Henry responds, counsel just reminded me that, as it relates to the DNC, we have indicators that the data was exfiltrated from the DNC, but we have no indicators that it was exfiltrated. There are times when we see that the data exfiltrated and we say conclusively, but in this case, it appears it was set up to be exfiltrated, but we just don't have the evidence that says it actually left. A little bit confusing here. Let's continue. Mr. Chris Stewart, a Republican from Utah, then says, okay, what about the emails that everyone is so knowledgeable of? Were there also indicators that they were prepared but not evidence that they actually were exfiltrated? Mr. Henry responds, there's not evidence that they were actually exfiltrated. There's circumstantial evidence, but no evidence that they were actually exfiltrated. So, Joe, it sounds like the FBI is saying that despite seeing a gun and bullets, they have no smoking gun that actually links Russia to the data exfiltration.
Right. And just to make a point about your opening, this is going to go on because we don't have all the details yet. I think the major pillars of Russiagate are collapsing. That would be the collusion narrative, which was tied to the Steele dossier, and this hacking by Russia, in which CrowdStrike is very much in the center of things. If you go to their webpage, CrowdStrike, they have a June 15, 2016 update, and it says, CrowdStrike stands fully by its analysis and findings identifying 2 separate Russian intelligence-affiliated adversaries present in the DNC network in May 2016. So they were lying. because Sean Henry gave testimony behind closed doors that he thought would never see the light of day. So their people are also under oath, and they could speak freely to the members of Congress who are in that closed door hearing. What happened was that Richard Gurnell, who was the acting director of national intelligence, put pressure on Adam Schiff to release these documents, and he did. And Schiff, of course, gave a long-winded introduction in which he tried to deflect from everything that any reader curious enough to go into would find out, in which he repeated all of the lies, basically, that Schiff has been telling about collusion and about Russia's role in all this. So when you get down to the nitty-gritty, which you've just read, you see that Sean Henry, the former FBI cyber intelligence chief who started CrowdStrike with Dmitry Alperovich, a Russian-born American citizen, he reveals under oath in a closed-door session that, in fact, they had no evidence that the data was ever exfiltrated at all, certainly not by anyone, including Russia. So when we heard that CrowdStrike had initially said it was Russia because they saw fingerprints there of Cyrillic letters and the name of the first Soviet intelligence chief, everyone, of course, in the media, liberal media in particular, believed it, and they went with this Russiagate story. Bob Perry, our founder of Consortium News, may be the first to really be skeptical early on about this whole story. And then many writers, including myself at Consortium News, and Ray McGovern, whose article you were reading from at the beginning, took that up, and we started taking this story apart, skeptical of it. Of course, we were smeared as being Putin stooges and Kremlin puppets and pro-Trump, and none of that is true at all. We're not pro-Trump. We are nonpartisan. Have articles very critical of Trump on our website, but we look at facts in a story, and we're not blinded by partisanship. We're not Democrats either. I mean, and we began to see that there are holes in this story, and those holes are becoming gaping right now with revelations like this. Now, of course, during the pandemic and long after that election, the Democrats are saying, why don't you just move on and forget about it? This is ridiculous for Trump to be obsessed about this in his tweets. Well, frankly, he was falsely accused over these 3 years. And when the Mueller report finally came out and said that there was no evidence of a criminal collusion or conspiracy, is the word he used, between Trump campaign and Russia, they still tried to deny that was true, that there still was corruption there. You have Adam Schiff basically still saying that now, even though Mueller himself did not come up with the goods. And now we see that the other pillar of the Russiagate story, the hacking story, is falling apart now when you have Sean Henry admitting under oath, although he never knew who would come to light, and that was 2.5 years ago, that they never had evidence of the Russians stealing this. So this is just extraordinary. Now you have John Durham's investigation that is ongoing, looking into the origins of this. I think he's got a lot of material to work with. Bob Ray wrote that if he were the Attorney General, he would take away Comey's and Jim Clapper's and Brennan's passports.
Just so we're clear, I don't mean to interrupt.
Well,
I guess I don't mean to interrupt. But just so we're clear, for 3 years, there's been propaganda that has been put forth on the American public that said the Trump administration, meaning Donald Trump, who had just won president of the United States, was somehow working with a foreign government that we consider to be an enemy, and that for 3 years, they've effectively pushed this particular narrative when the reality of it is Roger Stone, who was supposed to be the conduit between the two, got convicted for not being the conduit between the two and lying about it. And now you find that CrowdStrike, something that they all knew, basically didn't have evidence that anything was pulled from the email or from the server. And not just not having evidence that anything was pulled, they're having no evidence in real terms that Russia did it, despite the fact that the Democratic Party and the media pushed this particular narrative for 3 years. And now they're saying, move past it. This is going to be something that Trump is going to make hay out of going into the presidential election, correct?
Yeah, he will, and you can't blame him. Keep in mind, the FBI did not get access to those servers.
That's right.
That's what normally should have happened. Instead, it's a private company that was paid for by the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign to go in there and find what they wanted them to find, which was Russia did it. And now he admitted, well, we don't really have the evidence. Russia did it. It's important that you realize that it should have been a citizen fact, a Federal Bureau investigation that would do supposedly an objective investigation that was supposed to be nonpartisan. The very party his mail servers were supposedly hacked by Russia. And I want to make this point. I think it's really important. I personally don't think it matters whether this was a hack or a leak. By the way, this testimony also had great impact on WikiLeaks. Julian Assange is in jail not for anything to do with the 2016 election, but the 2010 leaks from Chelsea Manning. But, of course, he has been smeared and despised by Democrats because they blame him for helping Trump get elected and hurting Hillary Clinton. When the fact is, now we know that the Russians didn't take it. We don't have evidence the Russians take it. And the only real evidence we had was CrowdStrike and what Mueller says in his report and his indictment, which needs to be questioned further as well. So I don't think it's 100% sure that we could say there's no evidence Russia did that, but certainly not from CrowdStrike. They were lying. And I'm not very confident in Mueller's indictment either, but it's very complex to go into here. But I'm saying it's not important whether it was leaked or hacked. And why? Because the documents were true. The emails that WikiLeaks published, wherever they got them from, are true. And it doesn't when you have documents whose sources. It's only when someone tells you something orally, you need to check out their motives, get other sources to back it up. When you have the documents, and this is proven by the fact that WikiLeaks pioneered anonymous drop boxes, and now CNN, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Wall Street Journal, they all have anonymous drop boxes, which means Russia putting into CNN box, they would publish it. They would never know. If it's proved to be accurate and it's newsworthy, they'll publish it. So it doesn't matter whether it was leaked or hacked. What matters is the truth. If, in fact, these were doctored and fabricated emails that made Hillary Clinton look bad and Russia stole them and gave them to WikiLeaks or someone else and they were published, that would be sabotaging an election. But these were true documents. It wasn't misinformation, disinformation. It was information. So it was something, even if Russia did it, they did a service, I think, to American voters. Learn true things about Hillary Clinton. I think that's important because this debate can go on forever about leak or hack. Although now there's no evidence that Russia hacked it, at least according to CrowdStrike.
Yeah, Joe, I'm also interested here in another story that's coming out today. Margaret Cleveland had a great piece out in the Federalist titled, "Why Did Obama Tell the FBI to Hide Its Activities from the Trump Administration?" with the subheadline, quote, "Even after Barack Obama had left office and James Comey had a new commander-in-chief to report to, Comey obeyed Obama by withholding intel from President Trump." So you mentioned Comey and you mentioned Brennan, but what was the role here of Barack Obama? In the article, Cleveland posits that Barack Obama asked James Comey and Deputy Attorney General Yates on January 5th, 2017, to withhold information from Donald Trump regarding the investigation into the Trump's campaign alleged workings with Russia. How do we know this? Well, Susan Rice, who was at the January 5th meeting along with James Clapper, John Brennan, and Joe Biden, wrote herself an email. Wait, what? Yes, that's right. Rice on January 20th, 15 days later, on Trump's inauguration day and her last day in the White House, seemingly summarizes the meeting in an email to herself. The email reads, quote, "On January 5th, following a briefing by IC leadership on Russian hacking during the 2016 presidential election, President Obama had a brief follow-on conversation with FBI Director Jim Comey and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates in the Oval Office. Vice President Biden and I were also present." Rice goes on to write, "President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by the intelligence and law enforcement communities by the book." But then she added a significant caveat to that commitment. From a national security perspective, however, she writes, President Obama said he wants to be sure that as we engage with the incoming team, we are mindful to ascertain that if there is any reason that we cannot share information fully as it relates to Russia. The next portion of the email is classified, but Rice then noted that, quote, "The president asked Comey to inform him if anything changes in the next few weeks that should affect how we share classified information with the incoming team. Comey said he would." Joe, I'm curious what all of this means. And this, for me, also means a lot when it comes to the firing of Comey as, again, some type of smoking gun that Trump was covering his tracks. But if I found out that the previous president had basically told the director of the FBI to withhold information from me, I probably would look to fire him as well.
It could be that Obama didn't really know what was going on and that he believed what he was being told by Brennan, by Comey, that Russia was somehow, and Clapper, Russia had somehow compromised the Trump campaign. It could be that that Obama is orchestrating all of this. I would think maybe the first. I don't know. That's why John Durham is investigating the origins of Russiagate. I hope he goes into these questions as well, and he should. The question is that we know now from Flynn, another thing happened last week, Thursday. Flynn, of course, was the charges against him to FBI were dropped. Why? Now, the Guardian and the NPR, they report this without mentioning a couple of days before, documents were released which showed the FBI set him up to lie. Wanted him to lie. They wanted to keep this Russiagate going. So it looks like if this was cooked up, it have been cooked up within the FBI. There's some evidence of Brennan, the CIA director, also having a role in this, and certain guy who was working in the Kremlin and may have sent information supposedly linking Vladimir Putin directly to this hack, which now we don't think even existed. So it could be the intelligence chiefs or people in the intelligence agencies were adamantly, and we know from these leaked texts from Peter Strzok, they did not want Trump to be president. They wanted to stop him. They wanted to undermine him at all costs, so that they may have cooked up a lot of this Russia story. The Democratic Party from the very beginning was blaming Russia without evidence, except from CrowdStrike, which we now know not to be true. So to pin this on, they wanted to weaken Trump, even undermine his presidency, if not try to remove him eventually, which is what they did try to. So who was involved, how this got cooked up, over the real origins of this are still being investigated right now. But we're learning more and more all the time. Particularly the stuff about Flynn was very, very important. And that's why the charges were dropped. Not because Barr was doing a political favor. His president, that's the way the media and Democratic leaders spinning it, but it's just not true when you leave out these documents revealed. Now we have this testimony. So the more we learn, the more we're getting closer to what really happened. But I couldn't say right now, no one really can, exactly what happened. So I wouldn't blame anyone right now, but we have suspects. Yeah, and Obama's one of them.
Speaking of Obama as a suspect, I got to be honest, Obama, to me, would be the top suspect. Now, and the reason I say that, it makes all the sense in the world if they're looking at Donald Trump as being the second coming of Satan, and that he's going to basically be eating puppies and kicking babies, that they need to do something about it. And I can totally see how, in their minds, this is the best thing for America because we need to somehow weaken the presidency. Whether this was cooked up in intelligence services or whether this was cooked up in the Obama administration, it's not wrong for Trump to basically direct, I would say, his judicial arm or his investigative arm to look into whether or not Obama was intricate in this particular strategy in order to undermine his presidency, correct? I mean, and how would he even go about that?
Absolutely. Well, with Durham, John Durham has been the DA from U.S. Attorney from Connecticut, has been appointed by Barr, the Attorney General, to lead this investigation into the origins of Russiagate. He's not done with it yet. So certainly he's looking to all of this. The reason why I lean towards the intelligence agencies is because they stay in power. There's a saying at the end of saying probably the others, that administrations come and go, we're always here. They are more powerful than political administrations. I think they saw Trump as a threat because they did not want better relations with Russia. That's absolutely, I think, certain. And for other reasons. That's why I think the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, were more likely behind this making up of this story as much as it was made up to try to hurt, damage, bring down Trump than Obama himself. And a lot of times presidents are kept out of the loop by the intelligence agencies. We know this for a fact. And we current battles between Trump and his intelligence chiefs.
Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating to me, as you had mentioned, Joe. It's like somehow you have to pick sides between being on the side of Donald Trump or you have to be on the side of the DNC, as opposed to saying, no, we can actually consider both the Democrats and Republicans as not fair or good actors, as well as the FBI can be bad as well. And so anytime you actually go to critique what's happened with this investigation, you somehow get called a supporter of Donald Trump, which is absolutely frustrating to me. Joe, I wanted to end with a quick excerpt of an interview by the New Yorker with MSNBC's Chris Hayes, just to show you just how bonkers this whole thing has turned into some 3.5-4 years on. In the interview, Hayes is asked what he thinks about cable news and MSNBC having played some role in fostering a climate where paranoia about the other side or hyper-partisanship or conspiracy theorizing has happened, and if they can find common ground between different outlets. Hayes then gives a truly bizarre response, which included comparing what the FBI did to stir confusion and paranoia within the ranks of the Black Panthers was somehow similar to how Russia had stirred confusion and paranoia amongst U.S. media outlets. Hayes goes on to say here, quote, I don't want to lose sight of the Russians' agency in producing the state of affairs. I think in some ways was the seed that has flowered into whatever we're dealing with now. Joe, did Chris Hayes really compare himself and MSNBC to the Black Panthers?
It sounds that way. It mentioned that quote that MSNBC went way over the line, I believe, in the way it covered it. And they became hysterical. So the guy's got a very premier job in television that he apparently does not want to lose. So he can't go completely against his own network and saying we totally went along with the crap that we were told by the intelligence agencies. We overhyped it. It was horrible. We should apologize. No, Russia was still responsible. They just made things worse, like, the Russians did with race relations and everything else. So I just find he's trying to thread a needle there, Hayes, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny here. Obviously, we're on Russian radio, and we don't get messaging from the Kremlin of what we are to cover every day. But he's somehow arguing here that MSNBC is getting direct messages from the Kremlin telling them what to cover, that they're so confused by all the disinformation that they basically have no agency over what they produce there at MSNBC. It's just truly bizarre that he went there with this. And I guess, Jamal, as we were joking before the show today, we keep on using bizarre and surprising when everything is rather consistent with how the media covers all of these stories. Well, with that, unfortunately, we are out of time with Joe Lauria, the editor of Consortium News. Joe, where can people find more of you and your work online?
Consortiumnews.com. Simple as that. Read our articles and watch our webcast CN Live. And don't be afraid to donate to us. Thank you very much.
Very cool. That's Joe Lauria of Consortium News. Joe, thank you again for being with us. With that, we head to a minute break before we look at the latest from a very poorly and very dumb coup attempt in Venezuela. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's
a Tic Tac UFO, man. Just like the one the U.S. Navy caught on video in 2004, but only came clean about it last year.
No, I'm pretty sure it was a bird.
Whatever.
Get nerdy on Wednesdays with Revelations. The Political Misfits look into the world's mysteries and a lot of UFO stuff.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am bunkered down with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Give us a call at 202-521-1320 if you guys want to join this conversation on anything that we've talked about or anything else that is on your mind. Keep it PG. Also, definitely give us a like and share the content if you are indeed digging this content. So, over the weekend, there was a poorly organized coup attempt in Venezuela. The farcical attempted invasion of Venezuela consisted of a few dozen mercenaries, might be over, but the comedy keeps going. Venezuela announced Sunday night that it had captured a total of 11 wannabe insurgents in the country, including one that TV channel VTV reports to be the nephew of Cliver Al-Qaya himself. Al-Qaya is the retired Venezuelan general who had confessed to working with self-declared Venezuelan leader, quote-unquote, Juan Guaido, to oust President Nicolas Maduro, and who seems to be Al-Qaya. Nicolas Maduro, who seems to be one of the masterminds behind the little comedic interlude. Al-Qaya couldn't be part of this particular raid because he'd been extradited to the United States on drug trafficking charges after turning himself over to Colombia at the end of March. 8 of the other mercenaries were captured about 50 kilometers from Caracas. The people were also arrested on Saturday and 2 on Friday, bringing the total number of those detained over the plot to 39. 9, according to Venezuela analysis. The other architect of the plan, American ex-Green Beret Jordan Godrea, who leads security contractor Silvercorp, told Venezuelan YouTube channel a few days ago that he still had troops in the field, quote unquote. Seems like a lot of those guys got rolled up over the weekend. The 41-page contract between Guaido and Silvercorp offer more details about the harebrained operation, including who it was including who okayed the mercenaries to kill and what kind of backup they expected to receive. And 2 updates on the name. It's Al-Qaila and Godreo. Joining us to discuss, journalist and media analyst Alan McLeod, who's doing the Lord's work by reading the giant contract so the rest of us don't have to. Alan, how are you today? Thank you for joining us.
What's up, guys? I'm very well.
So,
thanks.
Alan, this is nothing short of astonishing. Now, a private company hires goons to invade a sovereign country to not just capture or kill the duly elected president of that country, in this case, Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro, but also to basically murder anyone that gets in their way to accomplishing that particular objective. That is profoundly disturbing. Now, what did that 41-page contract say?
Right, so from an outsider's point, it's pretty funny watching these guys who thought they were a bunch of Rambos who were going to fight their way into Venezuela like they were the conquistadors of Cortez, going to just blow away the Aztec Empire, only for them to be apprehended by a few irate fishermen with old weapons. But the actual contract itself is pretty dark. One, the group, the American mercenary group, Silvercorp, led by Jordan Goudreau, said that in the event of a successful coup, they would essentially become Juan Guaido's private death squad in the region. It says that Silvercorp would, quote, convert to a national asset unit, will act under the direction of Guaido to counter threats to government stability or threats and work closely with other security forces. And if you know anything about Latin America, United States forces and oppression, you'll know that we've seen death squads operating in many countries that have killed hundreds of thousands of people. Another thing that's pretty interesting is it goes into the rules of engagement around how they're allowed to attack and who they're allowed to attack. And it starts off with, Maduro's forces. But then on the last part, it says, other illegitimate forces, including, quote, colectivos. And if you know Venezuela, colectivo is like this catch-all term that the elite use for working class people. It's a bit like how the word gang or gang member is used by a lot of racist police in the US for any black male. So really what they're saying is absolutely anybody can be attacked, can be killed at any point. The other interesting thing is, finally, that there's a lot of clauses about the use of Predator drones and AC-130s, which really starts, scratching your head because these things are only really available to the U.S. military and its very close allies. So who exactly were they expecting to back them up?
And just so I can update, the speedboat where they apprehended those people was last weekend, not this weekend, weekend before last. Also, they had other attempts prior in the months before. But they were just rolling up these guys up still continuously over the weekend. What's interesting, I'm glad you brought up the Predator drone issue. Because basically, and you tell me, if the United States at one point used to back death squads, and now it seems that they've basically allowed this to be privatized for a corporation to go through basically death squads. Who authorized this? I mean, basically, is it legal in any country around the globe for private enterprise to go through and murder either the president of that country and capture the president of that country or murder human beings in pursuit of doing that? Who approved and authorized this particular contract?
It's obviously illegal under international law to just oppose and overthrow on heads of state. But unfortunately, we don't really live in a world that's dictated by law. It's dictated by force. or whoever's got the most power. The Associated Press confirmed recently that they knew about the coup before it happened. The Wall Street Journal today confirmed that the CIA knew about it as well. And it seems pretty clear that Maduro and the Venezuelan government also had intelligence that this was going to happen. It seems like everybody knew about it. And I find it hard to believe that the Trump administration and their regime change specialists like Elliot Abrams or John Bolton wouldn't have been at least clued up about this. So at very least, they would have turned a blind eye to this, especially because the fact that, a lot of these people that were leading this were actually ex-special forces working and training in Florida, constantly going back and forth. Maduro said he tried to meet with the U.S. forces as well. So clearly what's going on here is the U.S. has offered the most paper-thin, small denial they can. Pompeo said the government wasn't directly involved in any of this. But frankly, we know that they've been trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela for decades now, and have become increasingly fiery and aggressive in their actions. So it seems clear that they had some sort of passive involvement.
Say for the moment, this motley crew of misanthropic people who basically hated that country and wanted to undermine the government of that particular country, not misanthropic, let's say misfits, who went through and trying to destroy or undermine a country. Say for the moment that this was a modicum of success in the beginning, and they take down a military base. What do you think the United States perspective would have been on this? Do you think they would have said, hey, we can't allow this coup attempt, which is nonsense? Or do you think they would have basically did what they did in the Middle East, where they said, oh my God, the people are trying to rise up. And because the people are trying to rise up, we in the United States should support this crew of basically freedom-loving coup-mongers or freedom-loving people who are topping the country or the government, the elected government of that country. My suspicion is that the United States would have turned around and said, all right, well, you have these people who are trying to overthrow Maduro, and these are the rebels, the freedom rebels. Now, they wouldn't have used the term terrorists, which is basically what they would have been. They would have done the same playbook that would have taken place in Syria and Libya, but would have taken place this time in South America. Am I wrong on that? Like, how do you think the U.S. government would have responded to each of these military bases being taken down as these guys tried to pursue their way to Caracas to take down Maduro?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, look at how they treat Juan Guaido, a man who's got in December, he had a 10% positive approval rating in the country and a 69% disapproval rating. That was before he was essentially kicked out of his own party in January because he refused to relinquish his role as leader of the National Assembly. I mean, just a few days ago, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo were tweeting about how, dawn is coming to Venezuela, a new democratic hope, etc. And in February, at the State of the Union address, Democrats and Republicans alike gave Juan Guaido a standing ovation as he was the guest of honor of Trump's speech. And also, we can just have a look at what happened in November in Bolivia, where a sort of similar action happened, where sorts of phony protests started occurring after a socialist, Evo Morales, won a pretty convincing election victory. The U.S. immediately cried fraud, and when the army took to the streets and forced Evo Morales out of power, what did they do? They basically tacitly accepted the coup and waited for months and months before all the dust had settled to start, criticizing the government and saying, hey, you should really start elections now. But that was way too little, too late. When it was an important time, they were absolutely behind the coup 100%.
Alan, I'm curious why the United States hasn't been successful in removing Maduro from office. PDVSA has talked about privatizing, obviously all these different attempts. The sanctions are overwhelming, to say the least, on the country. For me, maybe my short answer to my own question is because there's more to it for that country than just economics. And I think the United States simply looks at resource extradition and extraditing resources from these different countries and power politics, that they don't actually look at the culture and the movements and the ideology within these countries that are keeping Maduro in power. But tell me if I'm wrong on that. Why has Maduro, in your opinion, been able to withstand all of these different attacks?
Well, firstly, 80% of the population or more was coups or sanctions in the U.S., according to polls. the opposition itself is deeply unpopular in Venezuela. As for over a decade now, but especially in the last 6 years, been trying to come to power via terroristic methods, which include burning schools, churches, libraries, offices, throwing bombs into the subway, attacking children. We've even had a campaign of publicly looking for Afro-Venezuelans and then setting them on fire and lynching them in public as a warning to the other working-class Afro-Venezuelans. So the opposition is extremely unpopular inside the country, and it polls, often very even lower than Maduro, who, even though he's presented as a dictator and completely incompetent, and he's certainly got all problems, still commands a base of at least a third of the country or so, according to polls and according to votes that they've had in recent years, that are absolutely committed to the revolutionary process, even though it's going poorly. Also, Maduro continues to hold the support of the military. And so there is a substantial part of Venezuelan society which we never hear about in the West that actually supports the government. And secondly, the opposition, which are presented as this united force of Democrats, the population of the country just simply doesn't see it that way.
Yeah, I'm also curious, Alan, going back to this contract there with Silver Corps, some of the other groups that were mentioned in there, Hezbollah was referenced, maybe Colombia, also their role was mentioned. I'm curious if the United States is looking to other external actors to continue to help push for Maduro to leave office. And on that same note, it seems like the lack of U.S. populist support for this kind of coup attempt or whatever it is that the Trump administration still hasn't really defined has really also confused people. And I don't feel like, despite having bipartisanship here in the political elite level against Venezuela, I just don't feel like it's really caught on in the masses. Obviously, some people will know, Maduro, authoritarian, but basically they couldn't tell you any more details to that or why there's some urgent need for the United States to be in there. So who else in the world will the United States continue to try to pull into whatever this ploy they have going is?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has been trying to link Hezbollah and Iran to Venezuela for over a decade now with increasingly ridiculous and tenuous assertions. In terms of who is on the U.S. side, not that many. Certainly Western European countries, you see Maduro gone, and there's now a number of right-wing countries, very conservative, some of them dictatorships in Latin America, which have signed on to Trump's plans. From that, we're not actually seeing a worldwide push for Maduro to go. In fact, quite the opposite. The United Nations continues to elect Venezuela to see a series of high positions, deliberately as a message to the United States, saying that they recognize Maduro as the legitimate winner of the 2018 elections. So even though the United States is continuing to crush the country economically via sanctions, politically it hasn't really been able to build up a broad coalition of forces willing to on Maduro.
I'm curious. The countries that are around that are aligned with the United States, like Colombia, Brazil, what role do they have in this? I got to be honest. There is no way I believe that a corporation would sign over a contract like that if it didn't necessarily get approval from the U.S. government before they did it. I just don't buy it. They would put themselves under the line. Like, can you imagine Bob and I saying, all right, Bob, let's start a company. We're going to go and knock off dictators, or we're going to knock off elected leaders of countries that we don't particularly like. That's not it's extraordinary that they would do that. Also, they would have to have help especially from the speedboat thing, from other countries in the region that are aligned with the United States, like Colombia and Brazil. What role do those countries, now that they are, even, I guess you could say, Bolivia at this point, seeing as they were able to get rid of Morales, what role do those countries have that are basically surrounding Venezuela in regards to pressuring and trying to undermine Maduro in Venezuela itself from the standpoint of the government?
Sure. I mean, the U.S. has outsourced a lot of its regime change activities from the CIA to private companies, and they've been doing that for a very long time. The co-founder of the National Endowment for Democracy, Alan Weinstein, told the Washington Post, a lot of the things we do out in the open now were done covertly by the CIA 25 years ago. So of other countries like Colombia and Brazil. Well, I mean, these mercenaries were training in Colombia for weeks and weeks. So the government and local forces must have known about it. The Colombian government is breaking off ties with Venezuela, making aggressive actions towards Maduro. And so it's pretty clear that the government of Duque wants to see Maduro go. With Bolsonaro, he's signed on to many of the proclamations that Trump has made about getting rid of Maduro. A group called the Lima Group, which is a coalition of right-wing governments in Latin America, headed in Lima, in Washington, D.C., which is planning since 2017 for the overthrow of the country. It's absolutely clear that Colombia are deeply involved in these things.
Yeah, Alan, I'm also curious, swinging back to the U.S. domestic side of things as we do. God, it sounds so crazy. Still, Joe Biden and Donald Trump face off to become the president of the great United States of America next. But as you had mentioned, their bipartisan support there for Juan Guaido. I'm curious if you think the foreign policy in this light will get brought up whatsoever in the debate. I'm not really even sure where Joe Biden is on foreign policy, if not to the right of Donald Trump in many ways. And at the same time, Pompeo and Trump are pushing for regime change in Venezuela. So it's confused me, to say the least, as I sit here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. I'm curious how you see foreign policy playing out, and whether or not the American public really care about foreign policy at a great moment of a pandemic and economic collapse.
Yeah, I think generally foreign policy in the U.S. tends to be pretty bipartisan. Even Elizabeth Warren, who is a pretty far left in terms of the Democratic leadership anyway, said that she was totally on board with Trump's sanctions against Venezuela. Those sanctions are estimated to have killed over 100,000 Venezuelan civilians in the last few years alone, according to a United Nations special rapporteur. So frankly, I think there's pretty much bipartisan support for whatever torture the White House can come up with regards to Venezuela, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me in many ways that the Democratic Party was supposed to be the anti-war party in some way or another. But obviously, we have seen that they picked Joe Biden, somebody that was instrumental in the Iraq War. And I think will, again, continue, as Alan's saying, hold up that bipartisan nature of U.S. foreign policy. And all Donald Trump has to say is, look, we're trying to get troops out of Afghanistan. We killed Soleimani from Iran. Is that not enough? We try to make some peace with North Korea. And I think enough people are going to say, hey, the guy went there. And I saw a photo with him doing stuff that no other president ever did. And that looks like diplomacy to me. And if they can just push Joe Biden as kind of this hawkish former senator who he truly is, it seems like Trump can both be hard and crazy as a right-wing guy listening to neoconservative in many ways, listening to his team, while at the same time trying to be the anti-war candidate. He's a great showman and a great entertainer that he'll be able to, I think, weave that kind of narrative, because I don't think Democrats and Joe Biden have much leg to stand on. With that, though, we are out of time with Alan McLeod, author and member of the Glasgow University Media Group. Alan, where can people find more of your work online?
I write for The Grey Zone, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and Mint Press News, but probably best to just check out my Twitter, AlanRMacleod. That's Alan McLeod.
That was Alan McLeod. Alan, we always appreciate having you on with us here. And yeah, Jamal, like I said, it'll be really fascinating to see if any of the regions get picked up, if Joe Biden actually tries to talk about Venezuela specifically, tries to get into North Korea, or if he just also gets sucked into this whole China narrative of having to point fingers at China for what's happened with COVID-19. Absolutely a ridiculous stance to have. But nonetheless, here we are, 2020. Joe Biden's your Democratic nominee for president. So what else is there to expect? With that, we turn to our second hour of news, politics, and culture here on Political Misfits. I'm excited here, Jamal. Great guest coming up in our second hour. We're joined by Howie Hawkins, the co-founder of the Green Party of the United States of America and presidential candidate for their nomination. It's also Monday, which means it's our weekly Miss the Press segment. We'll have some fun there. Chuck Todd, you're under pressure. Will you apologize? NBC already has had to for your show, so we'll have that story and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's keep going against the grain. We have a full show, loaded show for you this hour, including our hilarious Mr. Press segment. Chuck Todd here is looking at you. Also, as always, we appreciate your chats, your tweets, and your phone calls. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. Your engagement in this show is amply appreciated and makes this show what it is. Also, if you're digging what we're putting down, please like and share this video. So, one of my subscribers emailed me to ask me if I'd be interested in interviewing Howie Hawkins, the candidate for the Green Party's presidential nomination. I basically said, you had me at hello, contacted him immediately, and requested our esteemed producer, Ms. Whitty, to also get involved in making sure that he can join us. So, without any further ado, joining us for a wide-ranging political discussion on where the left is going wrong in the United States, the reason the country has slid so far to the right, how third parties can break through in the political discussion, and why the Green Party has not been more of a political force in the United States. We have Howie Hawkins, the candidate for the Green Party nomination for President of the United States of America. Howie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
No, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Howie, you have had a long and distinguished career working to further the causes of peace and economic fairness. And just to give my audience a basic introduction of who you are, in 1968, Howie supported the Peace and Freedom Party, the People's Party in 1972 and 1976, and the Citizens Party in 1980. Also, from the first national meeting of the Green Party in 1984, Howie has been an organizer and an activist. In 2010, 2014, and 2018, Howie ran as the Green Party candidate for governor of New York, each time receiving enough of the vote share to qualify the Green Party for a ballot for the next election. In 2014, he brought in 5% of the vote, the most an independent progressive party in New York has been able to accumulate since 1920, when the socialist candidates were able to pull in 5.6%. Howie is also co-founder of the Anti-Nuclear Clamshell Alliance, which was founded in 1976. In the 1970s and 80s, Howie was also leader in the anti-apartheid divestment movement to end U.S. corporate investment in the racist oppression and labor exploitation in South Africa. Howie, you have been a busy man. What brings you into the presidential primary to run for the president of the United States for the Green Party nomination?
A lot of Greens around the country. I mean, I was basically drafted. It wasn't what I was planning to do. I'm a recently retired Teamster and had other plans. But, they convinced me that, we could run a serious national campaign to inject green solutions into the national debate and build the Green Party into a much stronger force in American politics. So that's how I got
I want to hear your campaign clip for the moment. So let's play this clip. This gives a little bit of basics of what Howie is running on from the standpoint of platform. Let's hear the clip.
Hi, I'm Howie Hawkins. I'm a Green Party member running for President of the United States. And my platform is about eco-socialism and an eco-socialist Green New Deal, because we can't go on living with capitalism. It's a system of endless growth, and it's killing the planet. It produces products without accounting for the environmental costs. And the whole system is based on exploitation. It exploits us as workers. We get paid a fixed wage, and all the surplus value we create goes to the owners of capital. The same attitudes and institutions that justify the exploitation of people are extended out into our regard for nature. This is more than just about heat waves and stronger storms. It's about ecosystems collapsing, agriculture collapsing, and with it, the basis for our civilization. We're calling for a socialist economic democracy so we have the power to choose how to produce for our basic needs within ecological...
Howie, I hear that, I get excited. Now, I get excited for multiple points. Look, basically, there's no point in the way we are organized from the standpoint of a society. We choose as human beings. And some people choose capitalism, socialism. But at the very least, people should care about having an environment where human beings, what we are, can live in a sustainable and, let's say, environment where we grow as human beings. But that's not really the way we live. We function as if our environment is infinite, and that on this principle of infinite growth, and that human beings are subordinate to capital. Now, that's why I get excited when I hear your platform, because it brings to a point of saying, hey, we have a habitable environment that if that habitable environment is destroyed, our life on this planet is also going to end. Why isn't that more popular as a platform? And I guess what I'm asking is, why does the Green Party have such a hard time catching on in American politics? I mean, you said yourself, you got in because you believe that the platform can do more than just pressure, that they can actually have some level of influence. So what's the disparity between the Green Party's platform, which I am excited by, as opposed to the American public catching on to that platform?
I think the Green Platform, in a lot of respects, articulates what the majority of people want. Away from the ideology, socialism versus capitalism, Medicare for all, a New Deal to deal with the climate crisis, an economic bill of rights to end poverty and economic despair, student and medical debt relief, so forth. The kind of things Bernie Sanders is campaigning on. We already know the people are for those things. So why don't they vote for us when we run third party? And the problem there is have a plurality winner electoral system, so that if you vote for the candidate on the left you like the most, you're afraid you might be helping the candidate was afraid of in this presidential election, that's Trump. So that dynamic political system makes it difficult for the Greens. But we have elected 129 people around the country, the local offices, a few state legislators. And I think we can build on that. And as we get more people into office, then the psychology that the Greens can't win begins to break down. And I think, over the next, going into the 2020s, we should be electing thousands of Greens, the local and state legislative and congressional districts. And then in 2024, if we got a caucus in Congress, we run a candidate for president, nobody will be able to ignore that ticket. So I think that's how we move forward. But I think the electoral system in this country is a big obstacle because people like what we say. They're just afraid to vote for us because it might help the worst enemy.
Yeah, I call that problem the esoteric other. I mean, it's. I would vote for this person. I like this person's policies if I thought somebody else would vote for him. Meaning, it puts you in this kind of weird box where, yes, the people like what you're saying, but by the same token, they think that the other person won't vote for him. Ergo, they end up voting for somebody who they don't necessarily like. Go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to jump in. I think it's interesting how you see kind of the snowballing effect hopefully happening there for leftist candidates and how you don't need very many to actually end up having a bigger movement take hold. I think of somebody like Kshama Sawant in Seattle, the socialist there. It just takes one socialist on a council or at the aldermanic level or somewhere in office to actually introduce policies. There's a candidate that I'm following here in Washington, D.C. that's introducing the concept of social housing. And I don't think people in the United States often realize just how few Green Party, leftist, socialist candidates are actually out there. I feel like people think that there's this great battle of ideas taking place from the far left to the far right, and we're somehow compromising. But yet there's so few socialists or few Green Party people in office. Howie, how important is it just to get those first initial candidates in places that they can amplify policies to be able to move the movement forward, as opposed to people always saying, well, look, you didn't compete at the presidential level, we're just going to throw your party aside?
I think the Greens need to tout more the fact that they've elected so many people. And then that will encourage people in other communities to also start electing people in their communities. So, but we got to scale it up. 500,000 elected offices in this country. While 129 is more than any party on the left since the heyday of the Socialist Party, or up into the 1930s, it's still a drop in the bucket. I think there's a lot of room to grow. And getting back to the question of, why we haven't got more support, the dominant tendency on the progressive left has been to try to go into the Democratic Party, influence it, or, run their candidate in a primary. And then you lose the primary, you got to support the centrist. Bernie Sanders is supporting Biden. All the Sanders socialists that vote for Biden lost in the sauce. I don't know you're for Medicare for all when you vote for Biden. He said he vetoed it across his desk as president. Vote for the Greens. Everybody knows what. Well, my pitch to people is don't waste your vote. Vote for what you want and make the political system deal with you. You give your vote away to something you don't really support, giving away all your power and leverage in the politics.
Right there. How we're on the same page. Because 2020 has brought me to that realization that more than anything else. And I know Bob and my producer are sick of me saying it because that's been my little trumpet. But I agree with you on that. If you're willing to put your vote into a party that in no way represents your political interests, you have no chance of getting those policies accomplished. And this has been going on for like the past 40, 50 years, where lefties have basically said, we're terrified of Republicans, and so we're going to give our vote to the Democrat, missing the point that by not voting for somebody who's making an affirmative argument, but voting purely to put somebody in that office just because you're scared of the boogeyman, that person is still doing policy, and that person is still gobbling. It's like, I'm going to keep that monster out so I can vote this monster in. I think one of the most profound things that took place in 2020 was when each and every Democrat said, we would go to a brokered convention in order to stop Sanders and his policy platforms, meaning in no way are we on the same side. Now, from the standpoint of you and making that argument, how do you make that case that basically the left in this country need to have some level of standards or the political system is just going to get worse? And in order to enforce that, you need to vote Greens and allow the Democratic Party to lose. How do you make that case to people in a way that actually sticks? Because I agree with everything that you're saying here.
You don't want to be taken for granted. Go in and vote for Biden, even though you support the policies Bernie Sanders was supporting. The Democrats feel we got you in our hip pocket. We don't have to pay any attention to you. And we can tack to the right to try to get votes in the middle. So if you don't vote for what you want, you're invisible. And the left loses its identity as an alternative, the ideas it would put forward. I mean, people on the left who go into the Democratic Party, they end up doing the grunt work for the corporate centrists. They're doing the phone banks and knocking on doors for people they oppose in between elections. So I would say to people on the left, raise your expectations. We want more than what Biden is offering, and express that in the election. And the Green Party might not win the office, but you mentioned in your intro, I got 5% of the vote running against Andrew Cuomo in 2014. He was hoping to run up the vote, get more than his father got, Mario Cuomo, more than he ever got, more than he got in 2010, and get ready to run for president in 2016. And he got less. And they had to look at, what was these people that voted for the Greens talking about? He had to compete for us now. And so he adopted three things that he had never supported before: a ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, and paid family leave. So you don't have to win the office to have leverage in the political system. And so
that's right. You don't have to occupy the square in order to have leverage. And that's what I'm trying to get across to people. When I make the argument that people need to stand outside of the political space. All of these lefties, you have like 20, 30 million lefties, how many ever, should be outside of the Democratic Party when they're making their demands if they ever want to have any leverage on the party itself. And that's why I like this idea of your platform. I mean, I guess my thought is if all of these lefties got into the Greens, either you would occupy a square or at the very least you'd be able to influence a square. But either way, it is a far better scenario as opposed to staying in the Democratic Party, especially since Biden might lose. Anyway, Bob, I'm curious, you get into this notion of, look, neither of us at this point are Democrats. I voted Green the last time around. I'm probably going to vote Green this time around, especially if Howie runs. But you seem to be more out of political processes. How do you view this? I'm curious. Go ahead.
No, I mean, for me, I think we have to get off this left-right political spectrum as the only way in which we talk about what's happening in political spaces in the United States. As somebody who is fascinated and have helped build movements, have studied movements, have watched movements, ebb and flow. Those movements come often in social and economic spaces, and then those turn political. And so this idea that we constantly frame everything as this left, right, Democrat, Republican, work across the aisle, it doesn't capture what's actually happening on the ground within communities. I live in Washington, D.C. Every single one of my council members are Democrats, or at least they're independents who are actually Democrats because of the rules and have to run. The executive is a Democrat. Democrats have been in power in the city for decades now. So looking at this left-right spectrum is not even the conversation we have. We actually look at on the ground, how are your systems communicating, and are the needs of people being met? And the needs of people aren't being met. Food shortages here in the United States right now. Obviously, we have a housing crisis in every major U.S. city in this country. When it comes to education, there's a huge crisis of the privatization to charter schools in our communities. That's Democrats and Republicans. So simply, again, if you look at the lack of needs being met and you focus in on Democrats and Republicans, neither party are meeting those needs. And so we need to rethink about how different people in communities organize and communicate with one another. Howie, I'm really fascinated about eco-socialism. I would love for you to talk more about that, because when you look at a systems approach towards how we govern and how we think about the interconnectedness between different parts in our community, you end up thinking a lot about the environment. And therefore, you see quickly that just like the environment, our political system is also a system. Why are those two not being talked together when they're the greatest threat to our existence as humanity?
Well, the eco-socialist Green New Deal, I put out a budget and it's a $27 trillion 10-year program to convert all our productive systems to 100% clean energy, zero to negative carbon emissions, and zero waste. So we're not putting out plastics and toxics and all the other things that threaten our existence in the environment. And came to 38 million jobs. And when we released it, we said the bottleneck is not raising the money, we can do that. Not the technology, we got it. It's finding enough labor. But now in this coronavirus depression, there was a study by the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank, one of their working papers, looked back 700 years at recovery after wars versus recovery after pandemic. After wars, we recover pretty quickly because we destroy a lot of capital stock and it has to be rebuilt. After pandemics, investors are risk averse. Sometimes you're short of labor because so many people died, and they go on in stagnation. To get profitable investment takes about 40 years for that to recover. So we're in a situation like that, and I think this eco-socialist Green New Deal is more relevant than ever, because even before the coronavirus depression, we were headed toward a recession because we have a classic problem of capitalist overproduction, excess capacity. They're not profitable investments that we make to produce more. And the whole economy was over indebted. So we were headed down, and if we're able to safely get back out and work, we still got those problems. So this massive public investment, we run it through the public sector. That's why we call it an eco-socialist Green New Deal. In the energy sector, the transportation sector, and the manufacturing sector, to rebuild these new productive systems. In a sense, what we're doing is we're destroying the old productive apparatus, or recycling it in this case, and building a new one. And that's how we get the economy going again. So I think what we were talking about now in the coronavirus depression is more relevant than ever.
When you guys are running, I was going to say, can I make one suggestion, but it's not really a suggestion. When you guys are running and you're making the indictment of the Democratic Party, from the standpoint of lefties, I think one of the key things to make it clear is that, your vote for the Democratic Party has been over the last 40 years. And basically, you've been maligned and taken advantage of without necessarily getting results. And doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is the definition of lunacy. And that basically, if you want any leverage and pressure in the political process, joining the Greens for your ticket is the way to go. I really hope people are receptive to that. One question. If you guys got in power, say for the moment that you were able to take office, what would you change? What would be your policy platform? And with changing the education system where kids can understand that the ecology and the economy are intertwined and intrinsically linked to one another, that you can't necessarily actually look at one without the other, in order to kind of grow a group of people who understand what you mean by eco-socialism?
Wow, that's a big question. But in terms of educating people on the economy, you would have, I don't know everything. I'm a retired Teamster. I'm smart enough to know I'm not an expert on everything. I'm going to bring in a lot of smart people like Trump who bring means and yes people. So have people that would explain public how we're doing what we're doing, and why we need a much bigger public sector, which is democratically planned and producing according to what people need rather than for the profit of investors, and how it works. I mean, we would do public education. And of course, the usual question I get, well, what if you do get elected is, how are you going to deal with the power structure that's going to be totally opposed to you? Well, in Congress, the message to the members of Congress in the House who face election in 2 years is, this is an historic mandate because we came from nowhere as, overwhelming underdogs. So you better get on board or, there's an election coming up in 2 years. And then we would want to keep the people movement that elected us mobilized to keep the pressure on. So we'd have to do things like that. But I think, the president has a platform to set the tone, whether it's setting the tone of tolerance and equality that is the exact opposite of Trump's racism and scapegoating, or whether it's, economics that's about uplifting the working people as opposed to giving tax breaks to the super rich like Trump did. I talk about 3 life or death issues: the climate, that's the eco-socialist Green New Deal; the new nuclear arms race, we need nuclear disarmament initiatives, that's a whole discussion. Also inequality, because inequality kills. Working class life expectancies are declining in this country. The only other place that's happened in modern history was when, Soviet Union turned into the Russian Federation and the economy collapsed. Well, we've been having a slow motion version of that. That's where the Economic Bill of Rights comes in. And so I think these are the things that, in office, if we explain it to people, they're going to be with us.
We'll talk a little bit more there about the nuclear weapons conversation there. Donald Trump obviously has continued the support of the military-industrial complex, has put more money towards those weapons. But it also has to be noted that Barack Obama invested a lot of money in the entire upgrading of the nuclear weapon program here in the United States, $1 trillion. That's both parties, again, acting in unison. Talk a little bit more about, I guess it's just one of those issues that we always just kind of pretend it's not out there and it doesn't exist, but it's a terrifying incident. And if you look at somebody like Kevin Camps, who is often on Radio Sputnik, talking about all of these near misses that we've had on the planet of major disasters that were just barely avoided. Howie, talk a little bit more about the urgency of addressing this issue.
Yeah, all these treaties that we were in that had nuclear arms control, we've gotten out of, from the framework with North Korea, the Iran deal, to the anti-ballistic missile treaty, now the intermediate force treaty, and next February, Strategic Arms Treaty expires, the last bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, Obama initiated, and Trump continues, a massive nuclear weapons modernization program that, among other things, is turning our strategic nukes, those are the big ones, intercontinental, or can come off the submarines, they're 6 times faster, hypersonic, which means you don't even have time to launch on warning, which was about 20 minutes under the weapons we have now. So you launch when you anticipate the other side launches. So the hair trigger is even more of a hair trigger than ever. Meanwhile, we're putting tactical nukes more into conventional forces with the insane military doctrine that we can escalate to de-escalate, they call it. And the Russians have adopted this too. I mean, our modernization has sparked modernization by Russia, China. The whole thing is destabilized. And the stupid idea of escalate to de-escalate, if you're in a conventional fight and you're losing, you use a tactical nuke to throw back your conventional opponent, and then you de-escalate. If Daniel Ellsberg is right, and I think he is, his last book was The Doomsday Machine, and he was a nuclear war planner before he was a Vietnam War planner. He said the whole thing's automated. Once the nukes start flying, they're all going to fly, and that's the end of it. So what I'm saying, and I've been saying this should be a top campaign issue in 2020, and I'm the only candidate talking about it. None of the major party candidates talked about it, except Mike Gravel when he was in. And, I appreciate that he did that. But it should be a top issue. We need nuclear disarmament initiatives. The U.S. should pledge no first use, should disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, should take other initiatives to demilitarize. I'm calling for a 75% cut in military spending, getting out of these 7 endless shooting wars, stop overt operations, special operations in over 100 countries every year, start back from the 800 foreign military bases we got. And on the basis of those tension-reducing initiatives, go to the other nuclear powers and say, we want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament, and we're ready to negotiate, and we will have the backing of the 122 nations which agreed to the text of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in July 2017. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that in 2017. And hardly anybody in the United States even knows that because the corporate media hasn't talked about it and none of the presidential candidates are. This is an issue that I hope the Green Party, not just our presidential ticket, but our congressional candidates, even our local candidates, bring this up. We got a resolution passed in New York City supporting this new treaty. So we would have 122 nations with us on the basis of those tension-reducing initiatives to go to the other 8 nuclear powers and say, let's stop this madness before it kills us all.
I mean, I know most of our budget is black. You know, most of the people don't necessarily know Chalmers Johnson in his book Blowback. He has one other book, I can't think of the name of it, but he goes into basically that the military budget is black. Most of Congress doesn't know what's in it. Most of Congress doesn't know what these guys are doing. We have military bases, I think like 800 all over the world, setting up missile systems in Taiwan and Japan. Many of the people, especially in Japan, do not want those systems there in the country. And like you said, the stuff is automated. The moment that you do one strike, everything else fires. And, you know, just from a common sense standpoint, if you're losing a fight and you have the capacity to pull out a gun, you pull out the gun in order to mitigate the fight. Well, your opponent is going to do the exact same thing. It's almost like the moment that the war starts, it's kind of the end of the war. I'm curious, this is a little bit of inside baseball, but from the standpoint of the Green Party, I sat in on a meeting one day where Greens were talking about funding their campaigns. And I was rather shocked that the conversation went into this notion of dues. The Greens don't accept corporate funding as far as I understand it. And because they don't accept corporate funding, the only other way, if I'm not mistaken, to fund it is using dues or donations. How does the Greens basically, how are you guys going to fund your campaign so you can actually put on a decent campaign against all of this money that's going to be availed against you in the various states?
My campaign is trying to replicate Bernie Sanders' model. What us how to do it with our corporate funding. Millions of people giving a little bit. And he raised over $100 million. So, you know, we're, I think, approaching $200,000. So we got a ways to go. That's the model for, and as far as dues for the party, I've advocated that. I paid my union dues as a Teamster. It was 2.5 hours worth of wages a month. And the labor movement, as beat up and shrunken down as it is, still raises $10 billion a year from dues. Because, you know, there are millions of members. That's how you have a party that has capacity to put field organizers in every state, to have a staff that can respond to inquiries, to put out publications, radio broadcasts, you know, video broadcasts, so we can communicate to masses of people. Right now, you know, we're operating on a shoestring. So I think we need to move in that direction to become, I mean, if we're serious about competing with, you know, the oldest political party in the world, the Democrats, as one conservative called it, the world's second most enthusiastic capitalist party, and then the world's richest capitalist, and do it, you know, with, you know, pocket change. We got to have a real budget and a real staff and a real organization. So I think that's where we want to go if we're serious.
Yeah, well, we wish you best of luck there. That was Howie Hawkins, a candidate for the Green Party presidential nomination. Howie Hawkins, where can people find more of you and your campaign online?
Go to our website. It's howiehawkins.us, HOWIEHAWKINS.us, like United States or us.
Well, thank you again. That was Howie Hawkins, the founder of the Green Party USA, the co-founder there. With that, we take a quick break before coming back with our weekly Miss the Press segment featuring a very deceptive Chuck Todd. As always, you're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
Reporting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out,
We actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Get nerdy on Wednesdays with Revelations. The political misfits look into the world's mysteries and a lot of UFO stuff.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schleber here with Jamarl Thomas. That intro music means it's time for our weekly Miss the Press segment, where we take a look at the worst questions, the worst interviews, and the worst of Chuck Todd from America's Sunday morning political talk shows. And, oh, Jamarl, there is a pretty good one for Chuck Todd this week. He basically did all the work for us, so not even much to do. We'll get to that in a second. But first, let's start with ABC's flagship Sunday show this week, hosted by George Stephanopoulos. In the clip here, and this is a meaty one here, Jamarl, George Stephanopoulos asked Larry Kudlow, the political entertainer on CNBC. Nope, wait, sorry. He's left CNBC, Jamarl. He is now the actual director of the United States National Economic Council.
God.
Yes, Larry Kudlow, all his cocaine. NBC is now the U.S. National Economic Council director. Yep, that's the guy running the economy and advising Donald Trump right now. Anyways, in the clip, George Stephanopoulos asked Kudlow to respond to former President Barack Obama's critique of the Trump administration's handling of the pandemic. Let's have a listen here. It goes, George Stephanopoulos plays the Obama clip, and then get Kudlow's response to this. Here's that clip.
We've now heard from President Obama, former President Obama, for the first time on his take on how the White House has responded to this crisis. Let's listen.
It has been an absolute chaotic disaster when that mindset of what's in it for me and to heck with everybody else, when that mindset is operationalized in our government.
Your response?
With all due respect to the former president, I really don't want to get into a political back and forth here. I don't know what he's talking about.
I don't know what he's saying, Jamal. What's the guy? Who's this former president guy? What's he talking about? Basically, Kudlow goes on to say, we're doing everything we can. Right now is not the moment to politicize everything. Right now is a moment where we're trying to rally together. Jamal, I got to imagine that Kudlow's response is pretty illuminating and will be pretty indicative of how Republicans look to respond to what's happening right now. They'll basically say, how dare you play politics in a time of crisis and tragedy? Right now, we're doing everything we can to save people's lives, and you only have time to think about the election. How dare you, Democrats? We're trying to save people. Obviously, Jamarl, it's a ridiculous position. It's not the truth whatsoever. The Trump administration's not handling this well, but it seems like if they can just simply say, how dare the Democrats play politics during a crisis, that actually might be a winning response for them.
You know, oftentimes in our politics in this country, we get into this weird frame of reference that these two parties and the marginal difference, the marginal teeny incremental difference between the two are wide political chasms in the way they handle these things. I would have loved for Kudlow to say, that guy gave 95% of the income to the top 1%, and he's giving us a lesson about someone. I would have loved for him to start with that. I would have loved for him to start with that. But Kudlow can't start with that.
But I don't think that's what sells, though. I think the Republicans, what they've been so good at is they've basically been that kind of sweet, gentle, we hear you people out there that are concerned. The government's not working for you. We're going to go fight those bad, evil forces. And they meet people where they are. I honestly think the Democrats, one of their biggest problems they have is that they come off as coastal elites talking down at the flyover states, basically lecturing people on how stupid they are and mocking them. And then they basically don't get anywhere because here they go again, mocking the Trump administration, attacking
people think they're liars. Like, I've talked to people who were, because Republicans are very straightforward and look, we're going to screw you over. Democrats use that feel your pain language. Oh, we're looking out for you. It's like Nancy Pelosi. She was like, oh, all of these kids aren't eating. Missing the point that Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House of Representatives. And she wasn't putting out squat to make sure those kids could eat. That's kind of what I mean. It's like when you see that, you can see the hypocrisy just built into it. It turns you off. I think that really is part and parcel to their problem.
Yeah, and it's their general approach towards politics. Again, I don't think it's a very homely, let's meet you at the door, let's talk all folksy like you. It's very condescending. I think it's a great way to put it. I was also kind of curious there. This isn't the first time Barack Obama has spoken up in the last week or so. He was also there recorded talking to some of his former officials in his White House and some people at the Obama Institute. And then now these clips coming out, basically his very vocal critique of the Biden or the Trump's response to COVID-19. I was curious, Jamal, is Barack Obama basically trying to run for Joe Biden? Is he going to start? Because he was dead quiet before Biden was basically the presumptive nominee. Didn't say anything. He was behind closed doors saying stuff, but it seems like all of a sudden we don't hear from the guy for 2 years, and then now in the last 2 weeks he's everywhere.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point, Bob. Because Biden stuck in his basement, and whatever you want to think about Obama, he does politics well. You know what I mean? Like, he's an efficient, because we're basically having a conversation about Obama, something that he did in his White House that lasted for 3 years, that wrapped this administration up in knots, potentially. He does politics well, whatever you want to say. And he can get out there and give those speeches and rile people up. So maybe, I mean, as opposed to Joe Biden, who's been nowhere. He's, like I call him, an invisible man.
Yeah, it's just for clarity. Is Biden stuck in the basement
one
or he's
the
locked
other?
in the
I don't know which one. Maybe his wife is keeping him down there to make sure he's okay. But she's always with him, which is weird in and of itself. Can you imagine if Obama was doing speeches and every speech he gave or every talk he gave, Michelle Obama was sitting right there with him because he was incapable of doing it? It would be so weird. It would be bizarre.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, I guess people posited that if Obama would have ran for a third term, he would have beat Donald Trump. I think he would have. I think Hillary Clinton was so uniquely hated, and I think they're just hoping Joe Biden's a little less uniquely hated than Hillary Clinton, a little less name recognition. I think Hillary Clinton, and obviously in a much different spotlight than Joe Biden was, even though Joe Biden was the vice president at one point. But yeah, I think Obama's just going to hope that given a 4-year hiatus and his relative popularity when he left office, that those two combined make him a very good amplifier and surrogate for Joe Biden.
Honestly, he's a weapon in this case. And the fact now that he's endorsed them, he's coming out. I guess the catch here is, I think every time you see Obama, I think the goal of it is to say Obama and Joe Biden one-to-one buddies, that type of stuff. But does it work? I mean, Joe Biden has been so uniquely absurd. Like inability to talk. And I keep looking at people saying, you realize that your presidents have gotten worse and worse and worse over the course of time. And you get to the point of going to Joe Biden now, who's a worse version of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess when Donald Trump's your president, you can just simply say, hey, he's as good as Donald Trump, I guess. I don't know. Jamal, let's get to our second clip of our Miss the Press segment. I wanted to slide in part of an interview from CBS Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. On the show this week, she had on Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and now the chair of the U.S. Department of Defense's Defense Innovation Advisory Board. Did not realize that one, but congrats, Eric Schmidt. You keep on moving there. In the clip, Brennan asked Schmidt about bringing jobs back home to the United States and whether or not specifically the U.S. would be able to begin making more electronic chips and tech here in the U.S. to avoid seeing the breakdown in global supply chains that we're seeing during the pandemic. I just wanted to play the ending of Schmidt's answer here. Have a listen.
It's important from a standpoint of our own economics. It's also important for national security. We want to make sure that our critical infrastructure is owned and controlled by America. Right. Never bet against America. We are the innovators in our world. We should be able to do this well.
Jamal, a few things here. First, the framing that everything is security and the economy does come at the expense of planet and the people, and that's extremely concerning, right? Eric Schmidt is a very, very wealthy human, and he's talking about the economy and talking about security, and that, for me, then comes at the expense of how well humans are doing, how his workers at Google are doing, and how this planet is faring. This paradigm and framing is incredibly dangerous on the Sunday morning talk shows and coming from people like Eric Schmidt. And second, Jamar, the never bet against America. We are the innovators of the world. You'd think with all of our innovation, we would have innovated a better response to COVID-19, no?
Right. You got 80,000 people dead. They're doubling the estimates for the number of people are dying. He was like, we're the best in innovation. We're exceptional. Yeah, you're exceptionally bad at dealing with the pandemic. The wild part about this, I want to just rewind for a bit and place people's minds back to this conversation about Huawei. Now, my wife and I, when we were traveling, my Huawei device basically allowed us to go from point A to point B, for me to still do my job, for me to still do my shows, and for her to still do her work. The device was awesome. Trump gets mad at Huawei, and what's the United States argument? We believe that the Chinese has infiltrated the technology, and so anybody else who's using Huawei, China, is basically listened to and instilling themselves into those communications. But what do we have here? Schmidt, Google, arm in arm with the United States government in issues of security. And Google, who knows everything about you, who's reading your email to even tell you when your airplane or your airline time is going to be had. They are now lockstep technologically with the U.S. government. Don't tell me about China and Huawei when you have systems like this where the government is working arm in arm with various tech companies. I mean, this is like overt. This is not even hidden to some degree, Bob.
Yeah, and to think about the basic fight that they're picking with China now, that's going to have an impact on our economy. And this was the game from, day one, Wilbur Ross in the early weeks. God, it's like eighth week we're in right now to say early weeks of the pandemic when it was just early weeks altogether. But early weeks of the pandemic, the Secretary of the Commerce, Wilbur Ross, basically said, great opportunity to bring those jobs back to the United States. China's going to be hurting, and look at how he had to eat his words, to say the least. But again, these people are only focused on the economy and not on people. It's really quite shocking. And to what gain, right? Eric Schmidt's not concerned about the response to COVID-19 for the well-being of people. He's concerned about the security of the United States and how to get technological advancements and developments to take place here in the United States. Why does Taiwan produce those chips? Is because we simply can, and because we're more concerned with free and cheap labor than we are practically ethics or morals of having a healthy economy.
Thank you, Michelle, producer. That pronunciation check. Also, yes, Bob, agreed. I think people, when they're growing up, especially like let's say for me, I can use myself as an example because I am my example. My mom was a very loving parent, and to her, looking out for the interests of other human beings from the standpoint of being empathetic, that was just her basis. That's how she was. That means you grow up in a household thinking of the world in a particular way and thinking of the world in the sense that human beings should be empathetic and care about other human beings. By the same token, I also have other members of my family who are more selfish. Now, I tend to revolve around the world from the sense of I, but that sense of I is pushed out to the rest of everybody else in a sense of fairness. And so, taking over my mom's properties. Here's the catch, though. What you realize is that not everybody functions that way. And if you have somebody who is, let's say, 10, 20, 30, $100 million, they are going to fundamentally look at the world in a different way than you are. Which means when you have the media, when you have the political class, and all of these people are of an entirely different class, the things that they care about are not the same things that we care about, because the things that they care about and the choices that they make are not affecting them. Meaning when there's like, we got to get these people back to work. Well, they're not working at those factories. So the choice that they make is basically for somebody else to die, for them and their owner class to continue to be profitable. Like, I think people need to realize that how they look at the world is fundamentally different than how human beings who are in a completely different class looks at the world. I mean, that's the way I see it, Bob. I think people need to have this is kind of an education thing. And I also think it's a thing where people kind of think that other people function in similar ways that they do, missing the point that when you're in a completely different headspace, you don't.
One person, Jamar Thomas, that doesn't see eye to eye with most Americans, but yet has one of the largest platforms. It's time, Chuck Todd, and Meet the Press. Jamar, this one is pretty funny and pretty rich to me. In the episode this week, Chuck Todd brought up the dropping of charges against General Michael Flynn and how the Trump administration was skirting the rule of law. To make his point, Chuck Todd played the following clip of an interview with Attorney General Bill Barr, who was on with CBS's News' Catherine Hedridge. earlier last week. In the clip, A.G. Barr talks about how history is written by the winners. Let's take a listen to Chuck Todd's setup, Barr's interview with CBS, and Todd's response. Let's first play this part of the clip.
You brought up Bill Barr. Peggy Noonan, I want you to listen to this Bill Barr answer to a question about what will history say about this. Wait till you hear this answer. Take a listen.
When history looks back on this decision, how do you think it will be written?
Well, history is written by the winners, so it largely depends on who's writing the history.
I was struck, Peggy, by the cynicism of the answer. It's a correct answer, but he's the Attorney General. He didn't make the case that he was upholding the rule of law. He was almost admitting that, yeah, this is a political job.
So, Jamar, I think he's right there. He did basically, Barr give a pretty cynical answer. Barr, with a smirk, says, history is written by winners, so tough luck out there, losers. That's what I heard. But wait a second. Soon after this clip aired, Jamal, it came to light that Barr had more to say in that interview, and that Meet the Press actually ended the clip and distorted and pulled out of context what Barr was trying to say. Now let's listen to the exact same answer Barr gives. The first answer is the same, but listen to what else Barr has to say, giving a fuller answer than what Meet the Press aired.
When history looks back on this decision, how do you think it will be written?
Well, history is written by the winners, so it largely depends on who's writing the history. But I think a fair history would say it was a good decision because it upheld the rule of law. It upheld the standards of the Department of Justice, and it undid what was an
lying Chuck Todd. Lying Chuck Todd. That is onerous.
So tomorrow, NBC has already conceded and to the mistake on their Twitter account just an hour or two after they posted. Earlier today, we inadvertently and inaccurately cut short a video clip of an interview with A.G. Barr before offering commentary and analysis. The remaining clip included important remarks from the Attorney General that we missed, and we regret the error. Well, that was Meet the Press's Twitter account. Tomorrow, do you think Chuck Todd will Chuck Todd come out and apologize?
That was a flagrant lie. You get all of those people are millionaires, and the people who are being paid to cut the videos and everything else, I'm pretty sure they're handsomely paid. And in that situation, they were so animated to find something to get Barr on that they did this. They just cut that off partially. His statement was literally what Chuck Todd said he didn't do. Chuck Todd said, shouldn't he have made an affirmative argument for this? He did. He did. He did exactly what Chuck Todd said he did not do. That is a flagrant lie. Chuck Todd didn't know that. Like, Chuck Todd didn't look at the entirety video before making, coming out on this major platform like this with Meet the Press. Russer is rolling in his grave, put it mildly.
He's on a few different channels. He's a very, very busy man, Jamal. So maybe there's, I don't know. It's like, it's incredibly frustrating again because, on one point, the clip is like an extra 20 seconds. So I could get if Barr gave a 4-hour interview that he wouldn't sit there and go back and watch the whole thing. But to basically take half of a clip and not listen to the remaining 15 seconds is malfeasance, to say the least. But again, here, Chuck Todd congratulating himself, pat on the back, Peggy Noonan there at the table with him. And all of these people continued to rip Donald Trump. And for what gain? So what? I mean, what's your point of all of this? Barr basically says, hey, at the end of the day, we got the guy. He got released. We won this one. It's a court battle. I think that it played out fairly. So where's he trying to go, basically? Again, just pointing to the corruption of the Trump administration. I don't really get exactly what we were supposed to learn, even if he played the entirety of that. Said,
let's say Barr just stopped it where it was. So what? I mean, the answer is technically correct. It's like, look, history is written by the victors. Whoever won it is going to basically make the determination upon whether or not they believe him right or not. But, I mean, these guys are in the camp for not Trump. I mean, I think that's what it boils down to. And like anything else, if within the agency that they have, they use it to try to be not Trump, in which case you get this nonsense. I think that's what I think.
And so you would naturally say, well, then they're for the Democrats. No, Jamal, they're for Boeing and all of their other defense contract commercial payers. Jamal, with that, we do need to put a pin in it and take one final break here on Political Misfits. That was our weekly Miss the Press segment. And as always,
you, Chuck Todd.
most important hour of the day. It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schleierhuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We close our show out today with a few stories we wanted to fit in so you didn't miss anything out there. The first story here from South Dakota. The governor of South Dakota is in a standoff with two Sioux tribes in the state over checkpoints the tribes have set up on highways that run through their reservations. The checkpoints are intended to limit and control the entrance of non-tribal members on reservation lands in an effort to stop the spread of the coronavirus. They are not stopping commercial vehicles or South Dakota residents from passing through, but out-of-state and non-commercial drivers will be turned away unless they can demonstrate that they live on the reservation or are a member of the tribe. Some of these checkpoints have been in place for over a month. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem sent letters to the tribes on Friday saying that the checkpoints had to be removed within 48 hours or they'd face, quote, legal action. The tribes are having none of it. They write here, Julian Bear Runner, the president of the Oglala Sioux tribe, said in a video posted to Facebook over the weekend, quote, "We have an inherent and sovereign right to protect the health of our people, and no one, man or woman, can dispute that right." He continues, "We must adopt serious measures to proactively deal with the serious public health crisis. We demand you to respect our sovereignty. Your threats of legal action are not helpful and do not intimidate us. The only way we can get through this is to work together as a nation." 17 members of South Dakota's Congress also sent the governor a letter saying she doesn't actually have the power to enforce state laws within reservations anyway, and that her approach wasn't helpful. The letter stated, "We could have helped facilitate conversations and given your office unique insight as to history, culture, protocols, and vernacular of how to work together with tribal governments. You elected, however, not to contact us and send an ultimatum to both tribes." Jamarl, curious your thoughts on the story. For me, in many ways, again, it's so easy to communicate, do diplomacy, build bridges, sit down and listen and talk to one another. But these elected officials are so power hungry that any threat or any challenge to their authority, instantly they have to escalate it to legal actions, to police actions, to basically push these native tribes either farther to the brink when they're already dealing with the pandemic in the gravest of ways.
Land. Real terms. And as an African American and as someone with my grandfather was a Cherokee, it's weird to deal with that and reconcile that. I mean, because to some degree, as a person, in 2020, I've clearly benefited from the land that they basically was stolen and killed all of the Native Americans off. The very few people that are left who are in these reservations are basically pushed to the brink and supposedly have some level of sovereignty. However, that sovereignty gets undermined anytime a company or anytime the government wants to appropriate that land. And I think this is no different. Basically, they're going to have to deal with the medical fallout for the United States and the government of the United States taking policy that is expanding the epidemic of COVID-19. And I would imagine their resources, especially if it's akin to anything, we spoke to the woman that was here, who was from the Sioux tribe, their resources are meager in comparison to the potential threat of the virus. I don't blame them for taking action like that. And I have issues with our government trespassing on issues of their sovereignty. Now, I guess the question becomes, what happens? Does the governor send the cops in to arrest that member and the entirety of the tribal, I guess, leadership? And if there's a new tribal leadership that does the exact same thing, do they send the cops in to arrest them? Like, what's the repercussions for them saying no?
Yeah, and I guess that's what they would have to do. And the fact that this goes much beyond coronavirus, but these people that are moving there in North Dakota, especially around a lot of these natural gas fields and fracking, there's been all sorts of stories about rape and missing people. I mean, you have strangers moving from around the country onto your land with very little to do but work and drink. You're going to have all sorts of problems. And here the tribes are basically just wanting to protect the sovereignty of their land, and now you have the federal government pushing in. Jamal, I also wanted to get in another story here. Political reports notice been issued for the wife of a U.S. intelligence officer charged with causing the death of a teenage motorcyclist in a car crash in August 2019.
Yeah.
As you may remember, that's Skolas. According to the Independent, the parents of Harry Dunn, who was killed near a Royal Air Force base in Northamptonshire in August, were informed by British police that Skolas is now wanted internationally, and should she leave the U.S., the wanted circulation should be enacted. I'm not saying the woman right tomorrow, but if you're going to murder somebody and get hit by a car, but then flee to the United States and seek ultimate protections here under quote-unquote diplomatic immunity, it seems quite insane to me. This just shows the power of the United States. We can murder abroad, but find safe haven at home.
Tried to get safe haven in the embassy, they treated him like the British government is treating him like he murdered somebody. The guy basically skipped bail. And in this case, this diplomat, I mean, literally murder. I remember this case, and it was kind of a big deal because the UK was flipping out over this. They basically, killed somebody and then came to the United States for basically safe haven. It's good that the EU is flexing their muscles on this, saying we're not going to tolerate it. Good for them.
Yeah, Interpol there, so she'll be stuck in the United States. But at the same point, it's like if she just stays in the United States, she's okay. So it's not even home arrest; it's like country arrest in one of the largest countries in the world. I'm sure she'll be okay. Jamal, maybe some good news for sports fans to end on here. On Saturday, the UFC held an interim lightweight title bout in an empty stadium in Florida. One thing that became immediately apparent was how crystal clear the sounds of the fight were without crowd noise to drown them out. ESPN waxed lyrically about the thwops and grunts and other sounds of two bodies colliding that fight fans can now take in full. It was the first fight in 7 weeks and the first major sport event to return under pandemic
I bet that
lockdown
sounded real dirty.
conditions.
Just man love, one-on-one, in the ring by themselves. That's always funny to me, right? When you have the audience, you can't hear any of that stuff. And now all of a sudden you just have the quiet of the ring. Maybe people like that, though. Maybe you get more of an intensity when you can hear these guys like grunting and yelling and all of this other stuff. That might be pretty cool.
Jamar, let me ask you, the National Football League, the most watched sport in the United States, is to have kickoff its first games in September. What are the chances on it happening there in September?
I'm going to say... that's a tough one. I don't know, man. Like, it depends on how bad the virus is. If Trump's policy ends up killing a lot more people, like right now we're at 80,000. Let's say that number goes to 100, 200, 300,000. Then I'm saying no. If that number stays down, then yes.
Yeah, I mean, consider the models have it at 160 by August. Yeah, I mean, it's quite terrifying. Fauci has said that it'll be hard to imagine the National Football League taking its season as it usually does. He said maybe at best they could have the players play without crowds and that they could be tested, but the frequency in which you would have to test somebody, because you could basically, what Fauci did and the others that have now had a kind of a moderated self-quarantine, they basically said, look, we could have got it on Monday, tested on Tuesday and tested positive, but not have it take full effect until Wednesday or Thursday. It basically says that it's impossible to test these football players with the frequency that it would need to know that none of them were shedding the disease and others could be at risk. And then even then, if you want to fill stadiums, it's going to be insane to watch these stadiums that hold, 70, 80,000 people be filled up to a third full while people sit 6 feet apart. I just don't trust drunk football fans for having social distance whatsoever, Jamar. I just don't know how it's going to work out. So we'll look forward to seeing how that plays out. I'm already missing my
stadiums full, but I do buy them doing football. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars, and every incentive in the world is going to be, all right, we're going to test these guys. Even if the test is not entirely accurate, they're not going to care. They're going to want to play it.
Yeah, football's a tough one because you have 50 some players on each side. Where baseball you have 35, and then basketball you have 12. I can see basketball coming back in some way. But anyways, we'll be back tomorrow with a brand new episode of Political Misfits. A big shout out to our guests today, Howie Hawkins, Alan McLeod, and Joe Loria. Thank you to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team for keeping us live during the pandemic. Shout out, as always, to our producer, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, Bob Schlaber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, I appreciate you all showing up. We actually had a pretty good crowd today. Let's see, we do have a chat. When Jimmy Dore endorsed Howie for the governor, it caused a lot of drama. Jimmy was attacked for calling Syria gas attack a false flag. Does Howie agree with the recent OPCW leaks to prove Jimmy Dore is right? I can ask him that, John McCarthy. I can send him that question. I would imagine he probably says, yeah. I mean, based on what he's been saying in regards to this show and what it seems like his political tenor is in regards to war and peace and those type of things, Howie has my vote for president. If Howie gets through the Green Party nomination, hands down, easy. It's not even difficult. And I would suggest other lefties take on a similar trend. Now, the reason is there are a few points. Joe Biden, look, I don't know what the COVID-19 thing is going to do, but Joe Biden may lose anyway. But from the standpoint of the left, 2020 should have gotten across to you in real terms that you cannot get what you want accomplished from a policy standpoint in a party that is ideologically and entirely against your policies. Again, they were willing to lose to Trump if it meant beating Sanders, which meant that we are not one party. We're not under the same umbrella. There's a distinction between who they are and who we are, and that distinction needs to be understood. The left, it may be counterintuitive to you, but I would say it shouldn't be counterintuitive since for the last 40 years you've done the same thing and haven't gotten different results. If you indeed want to get your policy ideas accomplished, pulling away from the party, extricating yourself, whether that's in Greens or whether that's just standing under this banner of policy, I would argue just stand under the banner of policy. You don't need to be associated with a party. If you're going to vote Greens, but otherwise, you're just under the banner of policy and you make the very clear demand. Accept these policies that are in line with the American public. Basically, do your job or you don't get our support and you lose. And stick with that year after year after year. That party either is destroyed because they can't win or it changes. I don't care which one at this point. So I'm going to end this here. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.